Welcome to Bringing Jesus Back into Focus. I'm Christian John Joseph, brought up in the Jewish Christian Catholic Church, born in 1957. I left when I was 16 because they were teaching that Yahweh is one God, is the same God as Jesus, and he's coming back on the clouds, although they didn't talk about that much, but they left it in there in the Gospel at the end of the Gospels. At the age of 16 I realised, well, first of all, the Jews do not worship one God. They worship a violent, brutal war god called Sekhmet, the Egyptian war god Sekhmet, or the Egyptian war god Ares, or the Roman war god Mars. The Jews called their war god, their brutal, violent, genocidal killer, Yahweh. Okay, fine. It's Sekhmet. There's no difference whatsoever other than the name. Sekhmet breathes fire as well, the Egyptian war god, to slaughter, burn their enemies, incinerate their enemies of the Egyptians. Well, what does Yahweh do in their Jewish religion? Incinerates children. That's the same God. So the Jews are worshipping Sekhmet, but they call it Yahweh. Okay, fine. Romans have got a God of peace, Pax. Greeks have got Irene, God of peace, love. The Egyptians have got a peaceful God called Shu. Well, the Jews were no different. They also had another God, different God, a God of love your neighbour as yourself. But, big problem, they lie. They say that God is the same name, Yahweh. That is a lie. That God is not the war God. That is a God of love. The simplest example I can give you is this. Yahweh says to Joshua in the book of Joshua, go down to Jericho. I'm going to give you Jericho. You can defeat them. Take everything. Take all the land. It's all yours. I'm your God Yahweh. I'll protect you. I'll help you do it. Thanks, Yahweh, war God. Off they go, all the Israelites. Kill all the people in Jericho, every man, woman and little child. Steal the gold, silver and brass from their treasury, take it back to guess where? The temple of Yahweh. Burn the place to the ground, steal the land. And they praise Yahweh and thank Yahweh for the wonderful gift that Yahweh gave them. They were just murderers and thieves. There's another God in the Jewish religion, in Leviticus, who says, if a foreigner, for example, someone from Jericho, I'm just adding that in, but if a foreigner, for example, someone from Jericho is amongst you, treat them as a Jew and love them like a Jew. Love them as yourself. One says go down to the foreigners, slaughter them, steal everything and murder them. Take all their possessions for yourself. That's the war God. The other God says these people from Jericho, foreigners, if they happen to wander into where you are, treat them like a Jew and love them. That is a different God. Now at 16 I knew that. I mean, who doesn't? I'll tell you who doesn't. Everyone is brainwashed. That's who doesn't know it. Well, thankfully I'm not one of those people. So I'm a Christian. The belief is this. The Jewish religion is a dualistic religion. One name, one body on the chest, Yahweh, two heads, a war God and a God of love. Okay, end of story, full stop. That's the logical truth. So it is. Jesus is only at one with a loving spiritual creator, so it can't be Yahweh. Impossible. Because he said, her love is like the sun that rises on the good and the evil. Her love is like the rain that falls on the just and the unjust. Unless your love is as perfect as her love, you're not getting into her spiritual world of love. Become a child of love and non-violence, he said. Awaken your spiritual identity and you'll leave in your spiritual body. And become that now before your body of flesh dies, otherwise you'll find it hard to get there. That's his teaching. I believe it. Rip out the book of Revelation. It's a stinking, filthy, slanderous book. It's the book of Daniel. It's a Jewish Old Testament book. It shouldn't even be there in the New Testament. It's an Old Testament book. What's it doing there? An apocalyptic put it in there to assassinate Jesus and the loving Creator. That's why it's there. To make Christians go back and worship the two-headed God of the Jews, which includes a satanic murdering war god called Yahweh. And Jesus said, you are children of your father Satan, a murderer and a liar from the start, and you do the lusts and desires of this satanic war god. And they were. Jesus knew they were dualistic. That's why he couldn't say the word Yahweh when he was teaching, because there are two Yahwehs. And if he said there's two gods, they would have killed him. Stoned him to death. Blasphemy! So I've rewritten the Gospels of Jesus Unplugged, second edition, to make it a much better version for everyone who's a Christian. If you'd like to read a much better version of the Gospels, written in a much clearer way and cleaner way, I've removed all the Jewish overlays and the distortions and the bad Greek interlinear translations. I've corrected so much and just removed all the lies and distortions, as I say, and perversions. And I think you'll find my Gospels of Jesus Unplugged stimulating, because it's only about love and non-violence anyway, which is Jesus is love and non-violence, and the loving Creator is only love and non-violence, and heaven is only love and non-violence. So all of his sayings, I've made sure I've tried to correct any misalignments or any lies, and there have been tamperings done to the Gospels, particularly in Matthew, but I've tried to straighten the path, you might say, to heaven of the narrow and straight way, which is love and non-violence. That's the path to heaven. So my book would make a wonderful study book, really, because I'm a Christian. I'm not a Jewish Christian. I'm not influenced by the Jewish religion. I have no regard for the book of Revelation other than to start a barbecue with it. That's the only thing that's worth. That's the only thing that's good for. Rip it out and start a barbecue with it. Then it's of some use. So that's an evil book. Anyway, it slanders my friend Jesus, so I'm not having that. And they're teaching this. I've been to so-called Christian churches that are just synagogues. They're just Jews. All they talk about is the Jewish religion and Jesus is coming on the clouds. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. I had no idea the Catholics aren't that bad. But, however, there's beautiful people in all the Jewish Christian churches, don't get me wrong. And they can all go to heaven. Don't get me wrong about that either. But you've got to follow Jesus to get there in his way. That's the cover of the book. I'll just read the first half of the back cover so you've got a general idea. Jesus taught we can all experience an inner spiritual awakening if we search for it. He called this the treasure hidden in the field of earth or flesh. This is our eternal spiritual identity, empowered only by the loving spiritual life force of our loving spiritual creator. Our bodies of flesh are only temporary and empowered by earthly things, and all flesh dies. Only our spiritual body and soul mind of love lives on to come into the presence of our loving creator to reap as we have sown. His teachings and spiritual way of love and non-violence can help awaken us all into a new spiritual life here on earth, leading us to the heavenly spiritual world of love after death. Jesus taught we all have two different bodies with us in one, and he said that the spiritual body, being eternal, is the most important to be healthy and well in spirit. He provides us with the spiritual instructions to follow and become at one with, to be awakened and transformed into spiritual children of light of our loving spiritual creator in heaven. So we're up to Matthew. We're reading, that's the contents of the book, and we're reading Matthew, which is a very long chapter because I've combined a lot of the sayings all together into one account. So in my gospel book is easier to read for starters because, for example, Jesus enters Jerusalem. Well, there's Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. They all have accounts of that. So I just combine all the different points in these different accounts and put them all together into one account. So you only have to read it once. Now, I certainly correct things or remove things that are redundant or shouldn't be there or have been, overlaid onto him. So it's much cleaner. I think you'll feel this is easier it flows better. I think you'll find my gospel translations flow better with a common theme. Jesus said you've got two bodies. Only a spiritual body leaves at death. Your body of flesh feed it to the vultures. It's in his words. Your spiritual body must be alive and filled with light and love from heaven. Be a child of love and non-violence. Bring your spirit back to life. Make that your primary identity now. Pass through the death experience and you'll be okay on the other side because your spiritual body was alive and well here, and the only people who enter heaven are children of love. No one else can get in. He said that. Jesus enters Jerusalem, Matthew 21:8-11. And many heard in the city that Jesus was approaching, so they went and spread their garments on the road in front of him, and others cut down branches and spread them also on the road to honour him. And when they saw him arriving, knowing all about the mighty works he had done in the name of our loving spiritual creator, they cried out, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of our loving creator. Peace in heaven, Hosanna in the highest. And the whole city was stirred up, asking who he was. And they were told, it is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth of Galilee. And the Pharisees, seeing this, said to each other, look, we are accomplishing nothing. The world is following after him. So some of the Pharisees, upset by this, said to Jesus, Master, rebuke your followers. He answered, saying, I tell you, If they were all silent, these stones would cry out. Have you not read, out of the mouths of children and nursing babies, you have perfect praise? Simple children see love. Complex, egotistical people don't know what love is. Author. Things were getting more dangerous for Jesus as many Jews were beginning to follow his understanding of our loving spiritual creator who is only love, and were leaving the two-headed God Yahweh that the Pharisees were teaching about. He was undermining the old God of the Jews, and the Pharisees wanted to get rid of him, as he was a threat to their power base, the distorted two-headed God Yahweh. Jesus cleanses the temple, Matthew 21:12-17. Jesus entered the temple of Yahweh, the two-headed God of the Jews, and drove out all those who sold and bought goods in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons and sheep and oxen. And he drove all the animals out too, and would not allow anyone to carry goods through the temple. And he said, My house shall be a house of spiritual prayer, says the loving Creator, but you have gone and made it a den of thieves. And the Jews asked him, What sign will you show us that gives you the right to do these things? Jesus answered, Destroy this temple and I will raise it up again. Then the Jews said, It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up again by yourself? But Jesus was speaking about the death of his body of flesh and being raised up again in his spiritual body after death. And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the scribes saw the wonderful works he did, and the children crying out, Hosanna to the spiritual child of our loving Creator, they were angry and said to him, Do you hear what these children are saying? And Jesus said, Out of the mouths of children and babes you have brought perfect praise. And the scribes and the chief priests talked about how they could destroy him, for they feared him, because all the people were amazed and enthralled by his teachings. And then leaving, he went and sought lodging in Bethany. Author. Jesus would have known about the slaughter at Jericho, insorted by the Yahweh One war god that the Jews worshipped and followed, who instructed them to commit genocide and go and kill every man, woman and innocent child in Jericho and steal all their gold, silver and brass to bring back and place in the temple of the two-headed God Yahweh and steal all their land. This is exactly the sort of thing Jesus was referring to when he rightly said, You have turned this spiritual temple into a den of thieves. I should have put in there murdering thieves. Do you get it? He knew they were worshipping two gods. That's what the Jewish Christians will never tell you the truth. They lie all the time. The Pope lies. He's a nice bloke, I'm sure, but he's lying. The Jews worship two gods. Once you understand that, it'll free you from the Jewish religion which has got a hold on you. You can only get to heaven if you're at one with love. The Jewish religion is dualistic. They worship a war god, a killer. Don't go there. There are the good Jews who only worship the good Yahweh, don't get me wrong. Jews can go to heaven, but they've got to worship the good Yahweh. If they're worshipping the satanic evil god, they have to go to hell. Jesus' question, Matthew 21:23-27. One day when Jesus entered the temple, the chief priests, the scribes and the elders came to him and asked him, By what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority? Jesus answered, I will also ask you a question, and if you give me an answer, then I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Was the baptism of John from heaven or men? They discussed this with each other, saying, If we say it was from heaven, he will say, Why then didn't you believe him? If we say it was from men, all the people will be against us, for they believed John was a prophet. So they answered him, We do not know. Jesus then said, Well, neither will I let you know by what authority I do these things. Author. Jesus had great spiritual insight and wisdom as a living spiritual child of heaven on earth, and was able to deal with such attacks and traps in a very clever way that prevented them from stoning him to death for committing blasphemy with his answers. See, Jewish Christians, or all Christians, have to understand, he couldn't say to them, You're worshipping a perverted two-headed God. If he'd said that, that's it. They'd all grabbed rocks and stones and killed him straight away. But he knew that's what they were doing. So how does he explain that to them without being killed long enough so that the real heavenly world comes into view of the loving spiritual creator of the heavenly universe and heavenly world, the heavenly spiritual life force of love? How does he bring him into that without getting killed first by having to put down the two-headed God Yahweh? He really took on a really massive task there, with some of the most hard-lined, satanic worshippers in the world. I mean, their war god was brutal, And as he said, your worshippers of Satan, the war god. All war gods. Sekhmet was brutal. The Romans were brutal. The war god, Mars. They're all brutal killers. How does he get them out of that without offending their war god? And they worship the war god. So if you offend the follower of a war god, what do? They kill you, because that's what war gods do. If you offend the God of love, what does that God do? Forgives you. You don't know what you're doing. Different God. Two sons parable. So he had to speak very carefully. That's what the parables were partly for. They often thought he's talking about us, but it's a parable. They couldn't, stone him. But he spoke more directly to the disciples in private, you see. Once he could trust them to not report him to the authorities. He had to win them over first to come across to the loving creator. Then they would begin to loosen the grip of the two-headed God would loosen on them. And they could come across to the one loving creator. The spiritual creator of their spiritual bodies, which I'm going to leave in when I die and reap what I sow, whatever that may be, according to my life. Jesus said, what do you think? Two sons parable. A man had two sons, and he said to the first one, Son, go and work in the vineyard today. And he answered, I will not. But afterwards he regretted his answer and changed his mind and went. Then he went to the second son and said the same, and he answered, I will go, sir. But he did not go. Which of these two sons did the will of his father? They said, the first one. Jesus said to them, Truly I say to you, the tax collectors and prostitutes enter the kingdom of the heavenly world before you. For John came to you in the way of virtue and moral decency, and you would not believe him. But the tax collectors and prostitutes believed him, and even when you saw this, you still did not change your mind and believe him. Author. The first son represents those who are lost in sin, but then change their ways and become spiritual. They're going the wrong way, doing the wrong thing, but wait a minute, no, I'll do the right thing. The second son represents the Jews who do not follow Jesus to become children of their loving creator, but remain worshipping their two-headed God Yahweh. Obviously he's directing it at the Jewish people, saying, you're not coming to the loving creator. These sinners and prostitutes I'm hanging out with and tax collectors, they get what I'm saying. They have a spiritual body of love in them, and the loving creator loves them and doesn't want to hurt them. They get that. They're going to get there before you guys, because you're still worshipping a war god. And the hardliners, Wicked tenants parable, Matthew 21:33-46. Jesus said, There was a certain householder who planted a vineyard and set a hedge around it and dug a pit for the winepress and built a tower and let it out to tenants to farm. He then went away to another country. When the season of the fruit harvest drew near, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect his portion of the fruit. But they seized him and beat him and sent him away, empty-handed. Again he sent them another servant, and they threw stones at him, wounding him in the head, and treated him shamefully. So he sent another, and they killed him, and likewise with others he sent. Some were beaten, and some killed. So the owner decided to send his own son, saying, They will respect my son. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and claim his inheritance for our own. So they killed the son and cast him out of the vineyard. What do you think the owner of the vineyard will do? They replied, He will come and cast those tenants out of the vineyard and give it to others to bring forth the fruit. Jesus said, Have you not read this scripture? The very stone which the builders rejected has become the head and primary cornerstone. This is our loving Creator's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. So our loving Creator's heavenly spiritual kingdom will be taken away from you and given to others to bring forth the fruit. So basically up to that point he's saying to the Jews, look, the good prophets have been trying to bring you across to what I now fully understand. I'm a fully enlightened spiritual child of heaven. It's only love. You killed them, you murdered them. You know, they tried to, the good the Yahweh of love in Leviticus, it says if a foreigner is amongst you, love them as a Jew. Those good prophets were trying to take the Jews towards a loving God only, away from the dualistic two-headed God. So Jesus is referring to those good prophets who were trying to lead them towards this oneness of love. They weren't there. Even the good prophets weren't fully awakened to what Jesus and Buddha awoken to. But they'd kill them anyway and throw them down a well and do all sorts of things to the good prophets. And anyone who comes against this stone, so this is the next part, you've rejected the cornerstone. A cornerstone of a building is the very first stone that's laid, and the cornerstone is where the whole building is aligned according to where the cornerstone is placed. The whole building that's built upon it will be absolutely aligned according to the placement of the cornerstone. Jesus is love and non-violence. Heaven is a spiritual world, another dimension of love and non-violence. You have a spiritual body that has to be filled with love and non-violence, and a spiritual life force from heaven, a spiritual mind of love and non-violence. Jesus is a spiritual child fully awakened to this truth. He is a child of love and non-violence, and his spiritual body is alive and well and waiting to leave his dead body of flesh when it's killed. He's the cornerstone of the new understanding of our spiritual journey on earth. He's the alignment to heaven. Love and non-violence follow my way to heaven. But then he goes on to mention another cornerstone to refer to another cornerstone. And anyone who comes against this stone, his false identity covering his spirit will be broken to pieces. And on whomever this stone rests, it will winnow them of their sins and reveal their true spiritual identity. I'll read that again. He is the cornerstone. The Jewish Christian Gospels, they say something like this: I'm the cornerstone. Anyone who falls against this stone will be broken to pieces, and whomever this stone falls upon, they will be crushed. That's in all the Jewish Gospels of the world. Some have crushed to powder, which is closer. The Greek word crushed has to be translated as winnowed. That's the correct translation, not crushed. The word crushed comes from the way they used to separate the useless husk from the wheat, the grain. They'd beat it on the ground, and that would separate the good wheat out of the husk, which was useless. And then on a windy day, they'd have it all on a blanket and they'd throw it up in the wind, and the chaff, which was lighter, would blow away. The useless stuff would be blown away by the wind. The Greek word for wind is also breath and spirit. So think about it in spiritual terms. The chaff is like the sin surrounding your spiritual body. Jesus comes along and breaks it apart, winnows it. And the spirit of spiritual love of heaven gets rid of your sins, blows them away. Once you become filled with the spiritual love of heaven. It's a really beautiful analogy. One of his best. Just brilliant. But the Jewish Christian Gospels translate it incorrectly. I've met Christians who believe this saying means, yeah, Jesus and God are going to kill all the bad people and crush them. They're Jewish Christians. You see, they're not Christians. They don't know Jesus. So that's why I'm doing this work, because I know him. I've always known him ever since I was a little kid. It's like, I've always known you as love and non-violence. Why are they saying all these things about you? He said, well, do something about it for me, Chris. Write about it. You know the truth. So that's the beautiful thing in my gospel reading, And anyone who comes against this stone, against me, his false identity covering his spirit will be broken to pieces. I'll break apart your ego for you. I'll break it down. I'll remove this evil satanic identity you've become. I'll break that to pieces for you if you come against me. And on whomever this stone rests, it will winnow them of their sins and reveal their true spiritual identity. See, Jesus removes the falseness of our lives, the lie, the ego, the I'm Vladimir Putin, I'm Netanyahu, look how many children I can kill, I'm so powerful. That's just a filthy, stinking, satanic lie they're living. If they let Jesus into their lives, he'll break that down. He'll winnow them of that filthy, stinking identity that's covering their their tiny, tiny little spiritual body now. Tiny. Almost lifeless. There's so little life force from heaven in them now. That's what it really means. It's a beautiful saying. I love it. But the Jewish Christian Gospels have distorted that deliberately. So that links him into the apocalypse again. He was going to destroy people. It's a really cunning, devious poisoning of who Jesus is and what he was saying. And some apocalyptic Jew has done it to destroy the connection to him and the loving Creator in heaven for you and me. Because I've been blessed, I've had a brilliant mother who's had such beautiful, intelligent faith. She only saw him and the love and God through love. I agree. She wasn't interested in the book of Revelation at all. Use it to light the fireplace, you know. That's all it's good for. And I agree. And the Old Testament, we're not Jews. We don't worry about that. We don't need a war God. Okay. The Pharisees and the scribes knew he was talking about them and wanted to arrest him, but were afraid of the crowd following Jesus. Jesus is talking about all the good prophets who were leading the Jews towards only a loving God being rejected and killed by them throughout time. The servant wounded in the head could be a reference to John the Baptist, whom they rejected and was beheaded. Jesus was an awakened spiritual child of our loving spiritual Creator in heaven, and he was bringing a new understanding about our loving Creator, who is only love to the Jews. This would destroy the old two-headed God Yahweh that they worshipped and was their power base. So they also killed him, a true spiritual child of a loving Creator, to keep and protect their distorted understanding of God. This correct translation concerning the cornerstone is perverted in nearly all the Gospels of the world, which translated in this way: everyone who falls upon this stone will be broken to pieces, but whomever this stone falls on, it will crush him. That sounds more like a war god. It's been deliberately translated that way by an apocalyptic Jew to slander Jesus, or at least to inflect it towards Jesus being the son of a brutal, murdering war god, and the God being the war god, which is Satan. It's an inflection deliberately done to lead Christians astray. That's why I had to correct that translation. The word crush really should be winnow to start with. And the Greek word fall, if you look it up in the Greek in the linear, it can also mean to alight upon, like a bird would alight upon your shoulder. So if Jesus alights upon you, if Jesus comes into your life, rests upon you, he'll winnow you of your sins. This says, and whomever this stone falls on, it will crush him. This is a deliberate, slanderous translation. It's an inflection. You might call it a slanderous inflection. They've deliberately slanted it towards the Jewish war god, whoever did it. They're an apocalyptic Jew who did this to destroy your connection to Jesus and the loving Creator. So it's shocking. Anyway, but I've corrected it for you, so the proper reading is in the Gospel there. The correct translation. Because of this distorted translation, many followers of Jesus are wrongly taught this means Jesus and our loving spiritual Creator are going to destroy and kill anyone who stands against them. That refers to Yahweh One, the war God of the Jews, not Jesus and our loving Creator, who only loves us even if we are lost in sin. Is that not correct? Look at his words. Banquet invitations refused, the original saying. This is interesting, this one. Thomas 64. This is the original banquet saying of Jesus. Jesus said, a certain person was entertaining guests. When the dinner was ready, the host sent a servant to invite the guests. The servant went to the first one and said, my Lord invites you. The guest said, some merchants owe me money, and they are coming to me tonight. I must go to give instructions to them. Please excuse me from the dinner. The servant went to another guest and said, my lord invites you. The guest said, I bought a house and have been called away for the day. I have no time. The servant went to another guest and said, my lord invites you. That guest said, my friend is to be married and I must arrange the dinner, so I shall not be able to come. Please excuse me from the dinner. The servant went to another guest and said, my lord invites you. The guest said, I bought a farm and I'm going to collect the rent, so I shall not be able to come. Please excuse me. The servant returned to the Lord and said, those whom you have invited to the dinner have all asked to be excused. The Lord then said to the servant, this is the original saying of Jesus. The Lord then said to the servant, go out onto the streets and bring back whomever you find to eat my dinner. Business people and merchants shall not enter the heavenly spiritual world of our loving spiritual Creator. That's the original banquet saying that Jesus gave, which has been changed in Matthew. It's stunning. Thanks to the Thomas Gospel, we've got a much better understanding of how the Gospels have been perverted, particularly by the apocalyptic Jew, whoever it was. Could have been Matthew, could have been someone overriding Matthew. Thomas 23, Jesus said, I will choose you 1 from 1,000 and 2 from 10,000, and these will stand to their feet, being as one. Again, Jesus is saying you've got to be at one with love, otherwise your spirit won't come alive. If you're divided within yourself between hate and love, you'll be in darkness. He says it over and over and over. But this original one, is he saying, people who worship money, merchant bankers, they won't be they won't be able to get into the heavenly spiritual world. They're not coming to feast on this beautiful dinner of spiritual words I've got, spiritual way to heaven, the way to live a spiritual life. They're not coming to enjoy the feast of my words, which will transform them into spiritual angel bodies that they'll have eternally in heaven. They're not coming to my spiritual feast of the way to heaven because they're all involved in money, worshipping money. That's the original saying. Also, this is the original correct saying of Jesus concerning the banquet. It is another reinforcement he gives to not become attached to the material world, riches and possessions, but rather expect the invitation to join him in the feast of spiritual awakening, but rather accept the invitation to join him in the feast of spiritual awakening that he prepares for us to receive through the nourishment of his teachings. No one is killed for refusing to come or thrown into outer darkness after coming in to join him, regardless of who they are. And in Thomas, Jesus refers to being at one or whole in spirit. We see this also in his saying, if your eye is single, your whole body will be filled with light. These are the awakened spiritual children of love and non-violence, who are the living children of our loving spiritual Creator on earth, the children of light that Jesus spoke about. This is the altered version. Matthew. Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who arranged a wedding for his son, prepared a great banquet, and sent his servants to call those who were invited. So suddenly it's about a king and a banquet. Someone's taken one of the original people couldn't come to the banquet, the feast, the original one that Jesus spoke, because they had to prepare a wedding for their friend. This apocalyptic Jew has taken it and extrapolated it out into another sort of dialogue. So they've used it, but then they've abused it. The kingdom of heaven is like a king who arranged a wedding for his son, prepared a great banquet, and sent his servants to call those who were invited. So it sounds sort of similar. Come to the banquet, for all things are now prepared. Similar. But they all began to make excuses. The first said to him, I have bought a field and must go out and see it. I ask you that I be excused. And another said, I have bought a team of 5 oxen and I must go to test them. I ask that I may be excused. And still another said, I have married a wife and therefore I cannot come. Now this next part is a complete false lie added into the dialogue. Because I combined Luke and Matthew, I can't remember if this is in Luke or Matthew, but it's part of the dialogue of this is a false saying. And the rest seized his servants, treated them spitefully and killed them. When the king heard about this, he was furious, and he sent out his armies, destroyed those murderers, and burned up their city. It's not in the original. Jesus doesn't do that anyway. He says, love your enemies. The master of the house, now we're back on track now, that's all a lie, that's false. The master of the house said to the servants, "Go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city and bring in here the poor, the maimed, the lame and the blind." That sounds more like Jesus. Then they said, "It is done as you ordered, and still there is room for more." So the master said to the servants, "Go out into the highway and hedges and convince them to come in, so that my house may be filled." Fair enough. Jesus wants everyone to get to heaven. So does the loving spiritual creator, of course. And the servants went and did as they were told, and brought in both the good and the bad. There's Matthew bringing in this apocalyptic: bad will be thrown into hell, good will come to heaven. He's brought in this dialogue again. The servants went out, did as they were told, and brought in both the good and the bad. The king saw one man who had no wedding garment, and asked him how he gained entry without one. So he invites everyone in. And then he says he hasn't got a wedding garment. And he was speechless. The man was speechless. "Well, you invited me to come in here, so I'm here." Then the king said, "Bind him hand and foot and take him away and cast him out into outer darkness. There'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called but few chosen." You could understand it in certain spiritual terminologies that although, the idea is these children are coming into heaven, right? So this guy's entered because he was, brought by the servants to come in and enjoy the feast. But he hasn't got a wedding garment on. You can only possibly say, well, he's not fully spiritually awakened yet. He's divided within himself. He's a bit of dark and a bit of light. He'll have to go out. He can't come into heaven. He can't make it. It's badly written, but you can see how it's sort of jumbled up. Some things that would clearly be from Jesus' understandings bring in the poor, the maimed, the lame and the blind. That's Jesus. But this business about the king heard about this, furious, sent his armies, destroyed those murderers and burned up their city. That's the Yahweh One War God, not Jesus. Author: Matthew has distorted and perverted this parable by inserting a fictitious episode where the king, representing either Jesus or a loving creator, murders all those who treated his servants badly or killed them after refusing to come and join in with the wedding. That is what the war God Yahweh of the Jews does, not Jesus or our loving creator, who teach us to love our enemies. And as Jesus said, "Whoever hears my words but does not follow them, I do not judge them." But here Matthew has Jesus murdering them, which is typical Matthew slander. And as always, Matthew tries to make it about the good being saved and the bad being destroyed. And Matthew shifts the original focus from the materially minded children not being spiritual enough to enter the heavenly spiritual world to being about the non-believers being killed or thrown into outer darkness and the believers being saved. A very heavy, oversimplified Jewish viewpoint. In general, the rest is about Jesus telling the Jews that they have missed the chance to follow him and his spiritual way and teachings that come from our loving spiritual creator who gives us spiritual life in heaven. They were the first children he taught about this spiritual truth, but they rejected it. He also points out here how earthly material concerns can block our spiritual awakening by not coming to dine on his spiritual words that can transform us. But those who have nothing much in this world are the ones who respond the most to his words and spiritual way of love and hope. And unfortunately, there are few children in this material world who get the message and join with him to enjoy and feast on the nourishment of the loving spiritual life force of our loving creator that gives our spirits true life. So that's a clear distortion there in Matthew from the original gospel. It wasn't about a wedding feast, although it was mentioned in the original, and someone's taken that and extrapolated it and then added in that, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, that sort of thing. I'm going to kill those people who killed my servants. Turn the other cheek. Love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. He who picks up the sword will perish by the sword. None of that is Jesus. That's the war god, the apocalyptic war god of the Jews. Yahweh One. That's satanic. So Jesus doesn't do that. So you can see how things have been distorted and perverted. And that's why I've had to write the Gospels, to make it a much clearer reading for children who really love Jesus and know him as love and non-violence as I do. You need a gospel reading that has all the important parables and everything there that's important, but it's clean and clearer, and it's aligned more correctly with what he taught. that leads you out of this world through your death experience in a spiritual body that comes alive by taking his words into you, and they awaken your spiritual mind of love and non-violence. Then your eye becomes single, and you'll experience it here on earth before you go to heaven. That's how you get into heaven, by loving now. So your body, your spiritual body is alive and well. Your body of flesh doesn't go to heaven. And then you leave in your spiritual body. That's what he taught. And you must bring it alive. He said, otherwise it's going to be hard to reach heaven. And if you're one of the satanic warmongers in the world today, well, you're obviously they're going to be screaming because of the mass murder they've committed to other children. See, when these satanic children kill another child, blow their bodies to pieces and shoot them with a gun and blow their legs off, they think, that's not happening to me. I've killed that child. Oh, look at them suffer. Oh, look how their head blew off their body. Oh, what a great shot. They think, oh, that's not happening to me. I did it to them. They have absolutely no idea they're satanic. They've got no idea what's going to happen to them after they die. All I can say is they will be that child. They will experience what that child experienced fully. One way or another, I don't know how it happens, but it will happen. Unless they repent and change their minds, apologise to the whole world now. They don't listen, do they? Love your way to heaven. Never join an army, navy or air force. Love your way to heaven or hate your way to hell. It's your choice. I hope to get to heaven. Hope you do too. Maybe I'll see you there. You say, I saw you on this video. Oh, I really liked what you said. I'm glad you said it. I haven't met anyone who said that to me yet, here on earth. I've been condemned though. Oh, okay. Well, at least that's something. Love your way to heaven. Bye.